Safety Committee, and we have two items today. Both involve the sheriff, so if he could please come forward. The first item that we have is going to be on the update on from the sheriff's office, the body camera program, and the second item that we have is a briefing on the domestic violence with Montgomery County Police Department and the Sheriff's Office are going to be helping us out on that as well. So, Susan, if you'd like to begin, please.
Sure, just briefly. The body camera program started back in October of 2017. It was just a pilot program through Axon, who also handles the contract for the Montgomery County Police Department. They did the test run for about a year, and it was actually free. And it seemed to be going well, and they wanted to extend it into a permanent program. However, no funding was recommended for FY19 moving forward. The Public Safety Committee recommended funding this fully, and that was put on the reconciliation list this year, which the council did fund. So now it's up and running as a permanent program. The sheriff's here with his staff to discuss a little bit about what their experience has been. And that includes things like any user issues, any challenges, any Public Information Act requests, sharing video and data storage, and what needs they may have moving forward.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sheriff. Welcome. And if everyone else could identify themselves, and we'll begin.
Sheriff Darren Popkin, Sheriff Montgomery County.
Mark Bonanno, Chief Deputy.
Tom Mannion, Director of the Family Justice Center.
And Assistant Chief Marcus Jones.
Thank you.
Chairman Katz, Councilmember Hucker, Councilmember Albernas, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to come over today and testify in front of Public Safety Committee and to highlight some of the really great work that the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office and actually the public safety agencies here in Montgomery County have been doing, especially in the role of some domestic violence work, and we'll be getting further into that as we progress. I want you to know that several years ago I had brought to the council the pilot program that Axon was offering. We initially got into that pilot program and had it for months, and lo and behold, while we were in the middle of that program, Axon came out with a national program that extended that for another 12 months. So we ended up really having deferring costs for almost 18 months on the body-worn camera program. We are up and fully running. There is only one position that we are still working. I am working closely with County Executive Elrich and the budget this year to fully fund. It just depends whether or not it would be July 1 of next year or January, and we are working for that. What I would like to do is have Chief Deputy Bonanno just give a brief overview. He has been kind of chairing the program in my office, and we've provided data for you as far as the program goes, and I'll turn it over to Mark.
Good afternoon. As the sheriff mentioned, we actually had two pilots, one for 6 months, then for a year. So the official start date for us began back on November 1st. We've outfitted 146 deputies. Basically, that's everybody from DS1 through the rank of lieutenant. And I would say overall the program has been well received. As with any new piece of equipment, there's always going to be a learning curve in adapting to it. Not to mention the senior deputies who have learned to handle their duties in a certain way and now be told that they're going to wear a camera and turn it on every time they have enforcement activity. But above all that, I think they really understand that this is the future of law enforcement, and it provides for not only transparency but accountability. What works out very well with us is that after the initial training to get the existing deputies up to speed, now all that training comes through the Police Training Academy. So as our deputies go through that training, they get to us for field training, and they've already learned that, and they actually, during the academy, they actually have body cams. They're not the official ones, but it gets that mind and memory motion of learning when to turn that camera on. So that's been a great benefit to us. All of the, of course, all the videos upload into Axon's evidence.com, which is their cloud-based data storage platform. It really makes it allows for the sharing of videos between the sheriff's office, the police department, and the state's attorney. It's all seamless. The state's attorney has an instance for the police department as well as for our office. They just reach down and pull it when they're going to prepare for discovery for defense attorneys, and it's very transparent. I mean, it just happens without the need to make phone calls, emails, or anything else like that. To give you an idea of kind of where we are, we're now up to 33,000 videos, roughly 5,000 hours of videos that have been uploaded, which really accounts for 4.75 terabytes. We've also had about 164 downloads by the state's attorney's office. Of that, 85 were downloaded for court purposes. So from time to time, we'll get requests for, like if we serve a protective order or peace order, there may be some video footage. We get a subpoena, we put it on a thumb drive, we give it to the deputy, they go to court with it. So all in all, again, it's been it's very successful, and we'll continue with it in the future. If you have any questions.
You know, the sheriff's office receives very few complaints, thank goodness. You know, I've got tremendous staff that works for me, but there is no law enforcement agency that doesn't have, you know, some complaints in general. We have been able to utilize the body-worn cameras, you know, during those sort of investigations, and in most cases, you know, it has provided the information that you know, to sustain or not sustain the sort of certain complaints that have come in. We are in the process of still reviewing it. You know, the community demands it. Anytime there's a criminal conviction now, Mr. McCarthy would tell you that if there's not body-worn camera evidence, then the jurors seem to believe that you're hiding something. But it is just part of accountability and transparency, and I will tell you that we work very closely with the McGeo Union President, Mr. Wren, when we were negotiating the directives and policies on it, and we came to agreements on how that would be. So far so good, Chairman Katz, and I will certainly keep the committee updated as we move forward on this.
Well, Sheriff, first off, thank you very, very much for what all of you do in the Sheriff's Department. And as you know, when it came before us, Gabe was not here at this point, but Tom and I were here, and Mark Elrich was the chair. When it came that it was suggested by the former county executive that we not fund the body-worn cameras, it was a 3-0 vote that we do fund the body-worn cameras. We'd gotten a bargain, and I guess they figured we should continue to get a bargain, which would have been nice, but it's not realistic. So we're very pleased that we did. We're very pleased that that the system seems to be working. It's amazing how much footage you receive, and you know, in many cases it truly stops the discussion. Somebody says so and so said, and the sheriff, the police officer, whoever can say, let's go back and see exactly what happened, and it's good to have it from various angles. So,
and I will tell you that very interesting. If you would ask Chief Jones, the majority of their Public Information Act requests are really, a lot of them are criminal in nature, and you know, maybe involving traffic enforcement or sort of an investigation type of things. And the majority of ours have focused on our role in domestic work. As Chief Bonanno said, there's been 85 requests now for some sort of public information or subpoena involving mostly civil cases, mostly domestic related. So it's significant work, but it is certainly beneficial to the judicial system.
either one of you gentlemen have anything? Go ahead.
Thanks, Sheriff. Thanks for everybody for being here. It's very helpful. Sorry, let me switch screens here. Sheriff, I saw the prohibition in the policy against using the body-worn cameras while engaged in secondary employment. I remember we've received complaints about police while engaged in secondary employment using inappropriate force or things like that while their camera was off. I wonder if you had considered, well, let me start at the beginning. How many deputies do you have and how many are engaged in secondary employment now?
I could get you those exact numbers, but there is maybe 10% to 20% are engaged in secondary employment. The answer to that is, I would like them to wear the body-worn cameras at all times, whether it's secondary employment or not. It gets, during our pilot program, we only had one camera. So after 8 hours of usage while you were working, that camera had to go into for download.
One camera per sheriff.
Yeah, one.
Deputy sheriff, not one camera for the department, yeah.
That would be correct. Thank
Yeah,
you
yeah,
for
yeah.
clarifying. Yes, there was the pilot program, the 18 months of the pilot program issued one camera per deputy. So for the one camera per deputy, the deputy would have to, at the end of their shift, it would go into, to be downloaded, and then would end up being picked up the next day. So they just physically didn't have it.
Okay.
And the other aspect of this is that not all the deputies have take-home vehicles, and we need to go back potentially during our next collective bargaining session and have some further discussions with the Mr. Wren as far as whether or not how to expand that. But that's basically kind of where it stands at the moment. But yeah, I would be.
Sounds like you favor.
I absolutely favor it. It seems to me that if somebody is engaging in, if has to engage in law enforcement, whether they're not it's their regular job or secondary employment, they're still engaging in law enforcement. I'd like them to have it on at all times.
Right.
But I completely understand the process, and it's something that we're going to have to discuss.
Right. I totally understand why it's bargainable, but I think the public interest is served if they're
I would
using it
agree.
at all time.
I would agree.
Section 5 lists some mental health interventions among the encounters that require body camera activation. When the footage shows a person that might be in the middle of a mental health crisis, the publication and dissemination carry very serious consequences, potentially for their, they essentially become part of the public record, can have impact on their employment and many other things. When then that footage is entered into the database, do you have any additional precautions? Is it handled with any additional sensitivity?
So over the last several years, Councilmember Hucker, we have supported a piece of legislation in Annapolis that would set down some actually certain guidelines for law enforcement to give us some better ways, not just under the exceptions in the Public Information Act requests that exist now. And unfortunately, that bill has failed the last couple years. It was not introduced again this year because it just doesn't have the, I mean, if anything, that transparency and accountability and releasing everything, it's going the other direction. But I will tell you, and it's not just us, it's every law enforcement agency in the country, there are some very difficult situations and scenes that are caught on camera. And right now, under the current Public Information Act, we are denying those sort of requests that come in. If it's DV related and it shows somebody in a form of dress or something that would be very embarrassing to the party of interest, and or in a mental health case where it's something that is a party of interest, we're denying those requests, and I have not gotten challenged on it yet, but that could happen. So the answer to your question is 100% absolutely, I'm not releasing them.
Thank you. Who's the sponsor of that legislation, and what are the main groups that testify against it?
I'd have to go back and see who the main sponsor was. 2 years ago, it got hung up because of some fight over another bill that had nothing to do with it whatsoever in JPR, and the chairman killed it because of MACO was supporting that bill, and MACO was not supporting another bill that the chairman wanted. And so you were down there, you understand how that works.
Bill was collateral damage.
That bill was collateral damage, and then last year it just didn't have the motive.
This current year.
No, last year. It was not introduced again this year, although we would have supported it against this year. So 2 years ago, 3 sessions ago, it was killed by the chairman of JPR. Last year's session, it just didn't get the votes, and then this year, it was not reintroduced.
Yeah, that's a shame.
It is a shame, because we would, law enforcement in general, on a statewide basis, would like some better guidance
Yeah.
when it comes to what we can release or what we can't. Right now, it's basically left somewhat discretionary to the chief or the sheriff who has that data.
If you don't mind getting back to me with the sponsor, I'd love to have more conversations about that, because it's a shame it wasn't reintroduced. If you have a very different Senate, albeit you have the same JPR chair, but if he wasn't killing it due to his concerns about that particular bill, seems like there would still be an opportunity.
Yep. I will say Mako was a great partner over the last 2 years on that piece of legislation, but as it goes down there, Mako has a lot of priorities, and this just was not one of them for this year. But I do appreciate everything they did in the last couple of years, because it would have been very, very helpful from a statewide perspective on what can be released.
Thank you. That's helpful. I didn't see anything. I may have missed it. I didn't see anything about. Do you have a protocol around the sharing of recordings with mental health professionals? For example, if a patient and their psychiatrist want to make use of a recording for purposes of documentation of making a case for medication adjustment or disability claim, are they able to access footage?
Yeah, that's a very interesting case. I have not had that request. The Sheriff's Office serves about 500 emergency evaluation petitions, court order petitions a year. So we are heavily involved with, almost 2 of those every single day of the year. And I've been around for a little while, and we have never had that request. I'd have to really look at in terms of the law and what I could release and what I couldn't release. And certainly if it was in the best interest of the client, we would, consider it if it was something that was going to help their mental health considerations. But
And would have to be permitted under state law.
yeah, and would have to be under the current Maryland Public Information Act, under the subject matter, would be that. And it's, there are a number of pieces of legislation this year down in Annapolis having to do with one of them is referred to as Anton's Law, and all of these bills are impacted by the incident that occurred in Greensboro, Maryland, and that was where a young man, it was an in-custody death, where a young man, I'm not so sure if you know too much about it, but the body-worn camera video on that particular incident has been available, and a lot of pressure on it was a very small agency, a lot of pressure on the chief down there to release that body-worn camera video, but at the same time under investigation, and the state's attorney saying don't release it. It's currently under investigation. So there are several bills in this year to really open up and kind of make sure that those sort of pieces of video do get out, and do get out quicker, and the entire record is out. It gets very challenging when something is under investigation, especially an in-custody death. So unfortunately, that particular bill doesn't extend to the MPIA bill, which would have kind of clarified some of these other things that I was mentioning earlier.
And then finally, Section 9 shows that the retention period for footage involving juvenile offenses is 3 years. Do you have any restrictions in place to maintain the privacy of individuals who age out of the system in that 3 years?
Under state law, you cannot release juvenile information at all, with the exception if somebody is a juvenile is charged as an adult. The sheriff's office typically does not get involved with too much of that. We do. The sheriff's office does handle all the juvenile arrest warrants here in Montgomery County. Those retention periods are identical to Montgomery County Police's retention periods. We thought that it was important that it was in there just in case it occurred. It is unlikely to ever occur, but that is something that the county police probably would be much more involved in on that sort of body-worn camera dealings with juveniles, because we just don't have that duty and responsibility.
Okay, well, thank you for the update again. I agree with everything the chairman said. This is a big step forward.
Thank you. Councilmember, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sheriff Popkin, it's great to see you. Excited
least
to
24
be-
hours, sir.
That's right. Excited to be working with you in this
I think
capacity.
it should be that you were at a social event.
That's right,
I don't
that's
believe we
right.
want to start anything beyond.
That's right. That's right.
The hearing started yesterday, 24 hours.
Yeah, there you
That's
go,
right.
yeah.
But I am a big fan of your leadership and of your outstanding force. One general question, is this policy, and I'm new to this, I apologize, but is this policy fairly consistent with the body-worn camera policy at MCPD? Or are there, I would assume it's very similar, but are there any subtle differences?
It is very similar in the areas where we may do similar work. If there's some differences, it has to do with some of the work that you know, the sheriff's office does not do. We're not the primary investigative agency or the patrol agency in Montgomery County, so there may be some subtle differences in there. There are some subtle differences in there also with their agreement with the Fraternal Organization of Police, because ours is, we have a separate bargaining unit, so they're probably, if you kind of break down, but overall, substantively, yes, it's very similar, and it's very similar to most agencies throughout the state. When the law passed several years ago, authorizing body-worn cameras, there was a task force put together with recommendations from the Maryland Police and Standards Commission, and those recommendations, I looked at those recommendations and we mirrored those recommendations. It was a statewide task force that had all kind of people on it, not just law enforcement, and including the Attorney General, who represents my office. And so much of that came from the state recommendations of what a model policy involving body-worn cameras would look like.
Gotcha. Thank you. And then finally, and you may have addressed this in your opening comments, and I apologize, I was a couple minutes late, but has this triggered the need for any additional technology within the department, or do you have what you need currently?
Yeah, so we believe that because of appreciate everything that the Public Safety Committee has done for support of this program. There's only really one piece that we are working on, and that is a technology person. As I mentioned to you, we've had 85 basic either subpoenas or public information acts, and it is time-intensive and resource-based, and the position has been approved. It just has not been funded yet. Working with County Executive Elrich, just trying to determine whether or not it's going to be funded July 1 or January 1 of next fiscal year. So I believe when I come over for my budget, we will have that satisfied and agreed upon, one or the other. But other than that, because of your all support, the program is working and working well.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it should be noted for the public that, you know, the body-worn cameras are something that everybody wants, but you, to Councilmember Hucker's point, there are certain things that cannot be released to the public. If it's if a police officer has to follow someone and someone is in the bathroom or whatever, that can't be released to the public. If it's a juvenile, that can't be released to the public, or someone that is, you know, giving a confidential type of statement, that can't be. I mean, we have to make certain, as much as everybody wants to be transparent, we have to make certain that we're keeping everybody safe. And that's what this is all about. So I do appreciate all that you're doing, and I know in your case, Sheriff, as the whatever the liaison or the legislative, whatever your title is for the Sheriff's Association, the chair, that I know that you're working on legislation constantly to help all departments, not just your department in the state. Thank you very much for this. Please, I know that you're going to stay for the second part of this, which is the briefing on domestic violence. And I'd also like to have I know Debbie Feinstein is here, who's the chief of the Special Victims Division of the State's Attorney's Office. If she could please join us at the seating there. And I don't know if anyone else, Dr. Raymond Kroll, if you could please join it, if I'm missing anybody. And Captain Gagan, if you wanted to join us as well, please. And if anybody else would like to sit up here, come on down. I mean, we're a friendly group. Go ahead, Susan, if you could please.
The reason that this briefing has come to fruition is because of the state law that just passed last year in 2018 for extreme risk protective orders. And they are a higher level of protective order that certain people can request if they think somebody is an immediate danger to themselves or others and they have weapons. And it allows law enforcement to confiscate these weapons under certain circumstances. So I'd asked some stakeholders to provide an overview to you. We've got several here today. I've got 2 short PowerPoint presentations, one from the police department and also one from HHS that I can run through. You've been given that copy up in your addenda as well as a freestanding presentation. I thought it would be helpful if Sheriff Popkin could give an overview of the Extreme Risk Protective Order and how his office handles those. We also have Debbie Feinstein here, and she has information in your addendum that deals with the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Team. I think I got that. We have Tom Mannion here from the Family Justice Center who can provide an update, and Dr. Crowell with the Abused Persons Program. So I was hoping we could kind of go in that order if it's possible. Oh, wait, I forgot my police. How about police after the state's attorney? Does that work? Yeah. Okay, well, we're starting with Sheriff Popkin.
Do you want us to introduce yourself?
Yeah, why don't, please,
Sheriff Darren Popkin, Montgomery County Sheriff.
Raymond.
Raymond Kroll, Chief of Behavioral Health and Crisis Services, Health and Human Services.
Tom Mannion, Director of the Family Justice Center, Sheriff's Office.
Marcus Jones, Assistant Chief of Police and Chief of Investigative Services.
Debbie Feinstein, State's Attorney's Office. I'm Chief of the Special Victims Division.
I'm Captain Sean Gagan. I'm the Director of the Special Victims Investigations Division.
Oh, and I'm afraid to interrupt again. I just wanted to bring to your attention, Laurie Duker is also here from Court Watch Montgomery, who's been instrumental in dealing with domestic violence issues in the courts.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Lori, for being here.
Chairman Katz, if I could do just a brief overview of the extreme risk protective orders. I teach this class. It's usually a couple-hour class. I will make sure I will not be with you a couple hours here today.
We will make sure of that as well.
Yes.
Sheriff.
However, I think just a quick history of how we got to where we are today with the extreme risk protective orders, or ERPOs, as you will probably commonly heard them referred to as. I chair the legislative committee for the Maryland Chiefs and Sheriffs statewide. So during the legislative session in Annapolis, I'm down there a lot working on public safety related bills, but especially with the ones that have to do impact Montgomery County and that are important from a statewide perspective. During last year's session, there were several school shootings across the country, specifically the one down in Florida, down in Fort Lauderdale, Parkland, and then right after that one occurred, thinking that it happens elsewhere, the tragic incident happened at Great Mills High School in St. Mary's County here in Maryland. So the bill had just been introduced in the House, House Bill 1302, and it was called Extreme Risk Protective Orders. Now that particular bill was, the way it was drafted, had some issues to it and was probably not going to pass in its form. So I was asked, because of my experience and expertise in the domestic violence protective orders, if I would be willing to sit on a legislative work group to assist in the drafting of the extreme risk protective orders and to be at every one of the hearings and potentially testify at the hearings, which is exactly what had occurred. Now, prior to the ERPOs being the law coming forward, law enforcement was always responding to these types of incidents. I mean, there's not a day that goes by that there isn't a 911 call involving someone in some sort of mental health crisis. And unfortunately, law enforcement always did respond, but there was no statutory authority to actually remove the firearms. So law enforcement would respond to a scene, and someone, in fact, could be having some sort of crisis, and the best we could do is take somebody to a hospital and to get, to hopefully some emergency mental health treatment, some medical treatment. But often, before the officer was back on this, in his beat doing his work, the person was evaluated and back at their, not held, and back at their home, and then right back in, still in some sort of crisis situation with access to those firearms. And so we know from our domestic violence incidents that the removal of the firearms out of the equation in a domestic violence case makes everyone safer. And so that was kind of the history of how the bill was kind of moving forward with that in mind. The original, if you were to look at the bill right now, the bill that actually passed, it's 44 pages long, but the first 29 pages were all strikeouts. So it's only the last 15 pages of the bill, and I was kind enough for you to give you a one-page summary.
Our budget's going to be much easier this year, Sheriff.
Yes. I put together just a briefing, basically of it's just a page and a quarter, 20 bulleted points of basically the fundamental substantive part of the ERPO law. And this kind of breaks down what really the law is. And it kind of breaks down to the fact that somebody is an immediate threat to themselves or others and has access to firearms. And that's basically the substantive portion of the law. I also have provided you with a data sheet. I'm sure Susan has gotten you that data sheet. After the bill passed last year, there was a very short period of time to actually train law enforcement statewide, because the bill was going into effect October the 1st. The end of the legislative session was in April. So this was a very, very large process change for law enforcement to put in place, and the courts had nothing in place as far as forms or anything else, because this was a big change. So myself and a couple other law enforcement executives provided training statewide for all the law enforcement executives statewide. I also was fortunate enough to provide that same training here for most of the local law enforcement here in Montgomery County, include the Montgomery County police detectives as well, and Montgomery County police executives. So from a statewide perspective and a local perspective, I think law enforcement was ready and prepared for something that was really a substantial change here. If you look at the data sheet, you'll see that there has been 422 orders statewide that have been issued statewide. The reason that there has been this number of orders is, I believe, because the legislative body in Annapolis setting up the process consistent with the domestic violence process. So it has probably the best access to immediate response of any of these red flag bills across the country. Maryland is the only state that allows for these orders to be issued by a commissioner. So you have access to be able to get one of these 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Most jurisdictions are not like that. The 422 number is out of February the 19th. So by the end of next week, it should be up probably somewhere around 475 orders, which is about 100 a month. And significant numbers based on other jurisdictions, other states. It seems to be what we had expected, at least here in Maryland, based on the accessibility to getting them. The commissioners are issuing 54% of those orders. So that is from my perspective, that is a very important perspective of this, because that means more than 50% of the time it's during when the court's not in session. When somebody is in crisis, having to wait from 4:30 in the afternoon to potentially 8:30 in the morning could make a difference between life and death, and especially in suicidal situations, because the old adage, if somebody's going to commit suicide, you know, they're going to do it anyway, so what does it matter, really is a false assertion. And if you can get really somebody help, and that help immediately, then it will potentially save. That matter, minutes do matter when it comes to those sort of situations. In many of the other jurisdictions across the country, most of they've been petitioned by police officers. In the state of Maryland, it's only been about 44%. And again, that comes down to because the accessibility by the commissioners to actually have family members, because the family members are the ones who know when a family member is in crisis. In the law itself, it doesn't require a mental health diagnosis, and Dr. Kroll would tell you the importance of that. He can explain a lot better than I can, but it doesn't require a mental health diagnosis, but there is a mental health nexus to a lot of this, and that could be just somebody in crisis, but it's that crisis then and there with the accessibility of firearms which makes this so incredibly dangerous. The final ERPOs, there has been some question. I've sat on a number of panels statewide, depending on what side of the fence you sit on, whether or not this is a good piece of legislation, these red flag laws, or not. Someone would look at it in terms of that only 50% of the actual ERPOs have gone to final. Depending on which side of the street you're sitting on, you can argue one way or the other. I will tell you, based on experience, that those are the very similar numbers we see in DV cases. There's a lot of family dynamics involved with this, but I will tell you, because there's usually a week involved between when an ERPO is issued and someone is in crisis, in many of these cases, we have either us, the county police, or another law enforcement agency has already taken the person to a hospital, got a mental health treatment, they're back on their medications, they're back being treated, they're beyond their crisis, and so when it comes into court for the final hearing, about 50% of them are going to final, the other 50% aren't going to final, but that person has been helped. And that's what really the important aspect of that particular case. I will also say that the important part of it, depending on which side of the street is, and I have seen this, is that the judiciary has taken a very important role in this. Of course, they hear all the hearings, but the due processes are in place that if somebody did abuse the system and get one of these without reaching the certain legal standard where it should be, they're not making them go final. They will dismiss those cases. So if they don't reach a legal standard and somebody is not, really should not be subject to one, they're not getting them. So the judiciary's done an excellent job with that as well. Now, if I could just briefly talk about, if you look on your data sheet under Montgomery County, it has a number 29. Of course, the minute after I printed this out, number 30 came in. So there has been 30 here in Montgomery County. I will tell you that 20 of them have been served by the Montgomery County Police. The Montgomery County Police have done an exceptional job with these extreme risk protective orders. They are the model agency in the state of Maryland. The way they've set up the way they are handling every one of these cases, they pull their detectives in. Chief Jones can certainly get into more detail, but they pull their detectives in because there's often quite a bit of investigation involved with this, also with the advent of a potential search warrant. And so the way they have modeled their way they are responding to these 911 calls or other investigations that come up, during the training I provided across the state, I've been using them as the example for other law enforcement agencies to use them as the model for this particular. And there are a number of law enforcement agencies across the state now that have adopted Montgomery County Police's model in this. So they have done 20 of the 30. The Sheriff's Office has had 9. So what does that mean? Why do we have 9? Why do they have 20? So the Montgomery County Police, being the 911 responders and the investigators, in this county, they are handling all of the cases that are brought to their attention directly by the 911. The ones that the Montgomery County Sheriffs get are either filed by clinicians, so they go to commissioner or court. We get the sheriff's responsible for all that process. And those are, or by family members that go, rather than calling 911, they go directly into court or they go to the commissioners. And then there's been one additional one that was filed by the Rockville City Police Department as well. Now, with all that said, the Sheriff's Office administratively is responsible for all of those 30 orders. They all have to be put into the meter system, the NCIC criminal database, because the urgency is, number one, the family member the petitioner in the case has to be notified within 2 hours after service, so we have to make sure that they're notified immediately. And because, remember, this is a very difficult situation going on with access to firearms. And because it goes into the meters and NCIC system as quickly as it does, it prohibits the purchase of a firearm. So if we did take all the firearms from them, but they say, look, I want to go back and, I'm still going to go purchase one, this should stop the purchase of a firearm. Certainly any sort of regulated firearm in the state of Maryland would be stopped by the Maryland State Police, and it should stop a long gun purchase through the FBI, through the NICS Center. Of those 30 cases, 21 have been mental health related, 6 have been DV related, and 3 have been workplace violence type of complaints. I will say, though, in all of those cases, they're all mental health related.
Right. Yep.
Sadly, we have had 2 significant school-related threats. Montgomery County Police did handle those as well. Firearms were seized in both of those cases as well. And so far, in those 30 cases, we've had an excess of 80 firearms that have been seized in those cases. So that's just a very brief overview. I hope that helps as we go down the line. And so far, it has been good. I do want to touch on just one other mention is I saw in Susan's packet, it did have some questions regarding the tragic incident in Anne Arundel County where a person was shot and killed by a police officer in the service of an extremist protective order. Because of the confidentiality, the strict confidentiality of the ERPO law, I can't talk about any one specific case. I can aggregate the data like I did for you in the little overview. I can't specifically talk about that case, other than I will tell you that it was a very serious domestic related case, and there's litigation ongoing, and it's a difficult situation. Unfortunately, the defendant in that case, the respondent in the case, did point a gun at a police officer, and they had to take immediate action on it. But that's really all I can really explain on that particular case because of the confidentiality of the law.
Do you have any questions? Because I know you wanted to leave. Okay. Thank you, and thank you for, Dr. Crowd, did you have anything to add, please?
Just a brief comment or two. One of the things about this is that there is a real strong interplay between emergency protective orders and the ERPOs, in that our psychiatric emergency petitions are about imminent risk of danger of injury to self or others. This gives us an additional tool to help keep people safe, and it's an additional step that the psychiatric and behavioral health system cannot take. Is one piece of this. The other piece is that when we in the behavioral health system decide, okay, a person is no longer at risk from harm or injury, we would release them from the hospital or wherever they happen to be being detained in the moment, which means they no longer meet the risk for hospitalization or being detained in our system, but doesn't necessarily mean that the risk is gone. And we've seen that in a number of cases where people have been released and consequences have been tragic across the country. That's one piece of it. I would agree with Sheriff Popkin that mental health issues often are at the heart of a lot of potential violence in our county, but I would also say that there are circumstances where domestic violence is an issue, where impulse is an issue, where the access to firearms and tempers flare, and there's an opportunity for danger that exists beyond what we would think of as as a hospitalizable problem. This is another place where ERPOs save lives, because it's, no matter how short a period of time it's in operation or the guns are out of someone's hands, gives us a chance to stabilize the situation, get some folks to someplace safe. And for that reason, I think this has been a useful addition to our reach around dealing with the behavioral health issues of the county.
Very good. Mr. Mannion, did you have anything to add?
So, I mean, I can give an update on the Family Justice Center, or?
Please.
Sure, okay, great. So good afternoon. Thank you again for all of your, for your time today. For this afternoon's briefing, I have an update on the Montgomery County Family Justice Center. As you know, the Family Justice Center is a collaborative co-location of both government agencies and local nonprofits. Serves as a walk-in facility for victims of domestic violence to receive critical wraparound services. So we're coming up on our 10th anniversary. We opened back in 2009. And for the first 9 years that we were open, we would serve about an average of about 1,000 people per year, maybe 1,100. Something quite notable about the 2018 fiscal year was that we actually provided services to 1,547 victims. That's a 33% increase. Now, we can attribute this increase to a number of things. I think first and foremost would be the incredible outreach efforts done by the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council through the Education and Outreach Committee chaired by Debbie Feinstein. The Education and Outreach Committee has put together a lot of really new and innovative outreach campaigns and outreach materials that I think are increasing the number of folks that are aware of the services that are available to them and are willing to have more conversations about these types of issues. I also think we can attribute this increase to the fact that people in general are more comfortable talking about domestic violence and sexual assault and different types of family violence. Those types of issues have really taken a place at the forefront of the public consciousness through things like the Me Too movement, several high-profile cases that have gone on nationwide. So from my perspective, I foresee that number only continuing to increase as people become more aware of the services available to them and more aware of who we are and what we do, and that the FJC is a safe place for them to go and receive services. Again, 1,547 victims in FY18. They ranged in age from 14 to 80. We provided those services in about 15 different languages, and we foresee continuing to provide these services to even more individuals. Again, looking into the future, I've been talking to directors of family justice centers throughout the country, including the folks that actually came up with the idea of the Family Justice Center, Casey Gwynn and Gail Streck out in San Diego, California. And what we've noticed is that, you know, really when people are involved in an intimate partner violence situation, that's often not the only type of victimization that they're experiencing, or at least it's not the only type of victimization that's at play. You often see co-occurring with intimate partner violence, things like child abuse, elder or vulnerable adult abuse, sexual assault, other types of family and sexual violence. And so what the Family Justice Center movement nationwide and actually globally is moving towards is this idea of being able to look at these different types of family and sexual violence as a whole, and being able to address them as a whole in the same collaborative way. What we found is that, you know, with intimate partner violence, this type of model works. This type of model saves lives. This type of model makes these services efficient. And, you know, again, the nationwide trend is that we want family justice centers to move towards, you know, duplicating these successes with other types of violence. Again, going back to the Montgomery County FJC, I also want to note that that 150 victims that we worked with were able to obtain ex parte, the temporary protective orders, through our video conferencing system at the FJC. We have the direct video link with the circuit court and the district court. As we all know, court can be extremely intimidating, especially for people who have never gone there before. the cases that they're talking about, the instances they're talking about, they've often never spoken out loud before. Many of them, English is not their first language. So having this service available at the FJC has been really incredible. Additionally, both of the domestic violence-related multidisciplinary teams continue to meet regularly at the Family Justice Center. Those two teams, one is called ALERT. It's a multidisciplinary team that works together in real time to collaborate on cases that we've identified as at an elevated risk of lethality. It's about 5% of cases end up being placed on alert. And the other one is the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Team. I serve as vice chair of that team. Debbie Feinstein is the chair. We meet monthly to review domestic violence-related cases that are either fatalities or near fatalities. And we take a look at those, look at all of the information, all those instances, and all of the reports surrounding those, and make findings and recommendations to try to prevent these deaths in the future. And then to close out my update, I did just want to bring attention to the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council's Choose Respect Conference. As many of you know, the Choose Respect Conference brings together students, parents, teachers, and other professionals to raise awareness about dating abuse among teenagers, and really help to start a conversation about these issues at a younger age. It's historically attended by about 500 or more people. This year, we've got more workshops being offered than we've ever offered before on topics related to dating violence, consent, how to help a friend, and things like that. The conference is going to be held on Sunday, April the 7th at Richard Montgomery High School. It starts at 12:30 and will go until 5 p.m. All of you, as well as your colleagues on the council, should have received an invitation. If you haven't, please let me know. And if you've received it, we certainly hope to see you on the 7th. So thank you very much.
Very familiar with your guys' work and just can't thank you enough for doing it. It is just, it literally is life-saving. And so I know you've done great work in establishing partnerships and going further upstream, working with the Recreation Department to make camp options available to families. One situation I did want to discuss right now, and I apologize because I have to leave in a couple of minutes. The county executive has established a, I think, strong practice of meeting with council members in anticipation of his budget release, and my meeting with him happens to be at 3:30. So I'll be leaving in a little bit. My office has personally got involved in a case recently, a woman who's the victim of domestic violence, 3 children under the age of 8, and I actually want to thank Dr. Crowell, who has personally intervened in that situation and helped move things through. But we did discover that there are very few housing options, particularly for these women who are in crisis that are county-owned, and there are over 400 cases, I believe, right now, waiting for some housing option that's out there. I don't expect there to be a response or an answer right now, but I just bring to my colleagues' attention from the Public Safety Committee that I do think they're, in the near future, want to work with the Health and Human Services Committee to discuss, and Fed potentially as well, some of those housing options that are out there, because it appears to be a gap in the system, and a very serious one, because there are very few options. In fact, Councilmember Katz and I visited a facility recently and spoke to a young woman who's in that situation herself. Right. So you can respond more broadly if you'd like, but that is something that I think we're going to have to address in the near future.
I mean, absolutely. I would just 100% agree with you. We work with clients who are victims of intimate partner violence who, they literally have nowhere to go. They can go into shelter. For some of them, shelter is not an option. And for some of them, they are in the shelter for the maximum allowable amount of time. And they still don't have somewhere to go after that, despite best efforts on their part and on the part of the incredible shelter staff. So it's absolutely a gap.
One of the things that County Executive Elrich has said that, and Andrew Klein, from his office chief, CAO, has said that they don't want to silo problems, that they want us to, everybody in government, to reach across and work on a problem through various departments, and this is exactly one of them. Gabe, obviously, is the chair of Health and Human Services for the council, and is on public safety as well. And that's one of the things that we need to do. We need to figure out, we know what the problems are in most cases. We need to figure out what's the best way to solve them. You need law enforcement, you need Health and Human Services, you need recreation, you need every department that you can think of to get someone to a better life. And that's what we're gonna have to work on. So tell Mark we say hello, please.
Just a
Yes.
quick clarification, the 400 families that Councilmember Albernoz is referring to are 400 families in the county that are struggling for homelessness, not necessarily 400 families that have domestic violence.
Right. Oh, yeah, the valid point, yeah. Thank you. Chief, please.
Good afternoon. So again, thank you for allowing us the opportunity to speak before you. So I just want to speak a little bit regarding the extreme risk protection orders that Sheriff Popkin, who I applaud to the highest level because he has been a true leader in this across the state. And he has assisted us in law enforcement of this transition because it hasn't been easy because it is truly a change in culture and how we actually go about and investigate these. But I just want to make a couple of points to it. It is no doubt in my mind that I believe that what has occurred since October 1st and some of the cases that we have been involved in have truly saved lives. There have been significant threats by individuals who have stated what they had planned to do. We had information that was legitimate, and when we went forth, they had the weapon power to do exactly what they had said they had planned to do. And so with that being said, I think this law has proven its worth already. It'll continue to do that. The amount of guns that we see daily is starting to rise, and therefore it shows us that people do have this type of weaponry in their homes, and the processes that the court has allowed that allows us to actually, go forward with many of these cases that, again, and in a lot of them, as has already been stated, does have a mental health component to it, but it allows us to get those weapons out of those folks' hands for some considerable amount of time. So again, I applaud the efforts of that. And our investigators who really take this from the ground running. So whether we are responding to a 911 call or a simple call for service where someone is making some viral threats, whether it's in a domestic violence situation, and we are gaining the information that states that these individuals do have weapons in their possessions and they've made these threats. There are cases that we are getting through social media that individuals are actually making these threats, and we are following up on those cases and monitoring, and therefore allows us to really put our investigators' boots on the ground and to work relinquishingly until they can figure out that, that they do have enough to move forward and process these things. We do, in many cases, even though families do have the options and other clinicians have the option to actually file, but there are cases that are, when they are brought to our attention, we do not put the onus on the families in order to file the necessary paperwork in order to do this. The investigators have been directed by Chief Manger and myself to actually take on the lead and to pursue these cases to make sure that we're not missing the opportunity to stop something that could be detrimental to that family or the community. So that's one of the things I just wanted to raise in response to that. So I'll proceed through with our domestic violence investigations just to give you a brief overview. As is noted that Captain Gagan, who is in charge of the Special Victims Investigations Division, is here. He oversees the actual the domestic violence elder abuse unit, and our policy basically requires that our patrol officers will mandatorily will notify mandatory response for our detectives assigned to this unit in the following types of cases. And those are the cases where the domestic violence incident, where the victim has sustained serious injury or has been hospitalized or is likely to be hospitalized, Also, we also handle domestic violence cases where a police officer, regardless of the agency that they're affiliated with, where they are the suspect, and we also handle all incidents of elder institutional abuse that result in either an arrest or the transport of that victim to a hospital. So that is sort of the guidelines that the domestic violence unit handles. They are the follow-up investigative group that actually handles this. There is a unit, it's 1 sergeant and 5 investigators that comprise this particular unit, and we have 2 victim civilians that actually assist with this particular unit. They are co-located in the Family Justice Center. This is again, as Tom and the sheriff have noted, it is no doubt in my mind that the Family Justice Center is a true model for this country. It is amazing the work that from the partnerships that we have developed throughout the years, and to give the victim that ability to have that one-stop shop is just phenomenal. So we have been working with them over this period in time, and we've grown to be able to be co-located in that particular unit in order to assist with these types of investigations. Again, how do we get these cases?
If I could just interrupt for 1 second, Chief.
Absolutely.
You're saying that the space is extremely limited at the FJC.
Yes.
And I know we're not going to solve that today, sitting here, but that is something that we're going to need to discuss.
Yes,
So,
yes,
if
and I
Susan, if you
appreciate
can
you
make
bringing that. Yes.
a point, a note of that, please.
Right, okay, absolutely. So again, and how do we actually get those cases? Again, our investigators are following up not only from our department also, but from Rockville City and Gaithersburg City Police calls for service. Again, we get referrals that are walk-ins to the center themselves that investigators can assist of or that are referred to by others. The Women's Shelter, the Abused Persons Program, as well as Shady Grove Hospital, their forensics medical unit. We may get notified about cases there. So again, what do we really focus on in these particular cases? We strive to conduct victim-centered investigations, and really in order to give the power back to the victim. We really use an approach of interviewing people with empathy, utilizing a trauma-informed interview process. And Captain Gagan is direct on exactly, he can speak to a lot of the components of how that would actually work. And again, we refer these families out to the Family Justice Centers, these additional resources that are made available to them, with all of the programs that are there. And again, particularly as it relates to protective orders and other services that are vitally important to them. And so just to give you a brief overview of how these cases, the numbers that it looks like, I know it's kind of light up on the board, but in your package, it shows that in 2016, we investigated 326 total domestic violence cases. Those numbers dropped dramatically almost by over 100 cases in 2017 down to 220. And in 2018, we stayed about the same of 222. And you'll see where we have cases that are open, that when they're open, that means that they're still, there's not been an arrest made in the case, or the case just has not moved forward for a variety of reasons. And then you see the numbers of arrests that again, if we have patrol officers that actually arrive on the scene, they see evidence of injury to an individual based upon the information they have, and that other party is still there, they have the power and they are mandatorily required to actually make that arrest, and they do. And again, the domestic violence unit, investigative unit will come in and do follow-up for investigative purposes.
And in some cases, is this the same person with multiple cases?
The investigators?
No, the person who's committing the domestic violence.
It's possible. It's possible that this individual might have had a prior domestic violence case against them. It just depends. Sometimes it might be the first time. Right. So if it's the first time, but there's evidence of injury, then the individual would be arrested. It's not that he would not be or she would not be. Okay. Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I just want to clarify. So the total number of DV cases that are listed here are not the totality of what the Montgomery County Police Department handles each year. those are the number of cases that would fit in that category that, a couple slides before, of what would come to the investigators that make up the domestic violence unit itself.
I see.
Okay?
Good. Thank you for the clarification.
So, so with that being said, again, it's victim-driven. We try to do our best, and as well as every person that's here at the table, having victims move forward in order for the case to actually, if it's going to be prosecuted, in order for it to fully go throughout the entire process. In some cases, in many cases, as people here will tell you, that all victims may not necessarily want this case to be prosecuted, and therefore, we can't push them to do that at that particular time. So that does may again cause for a reoccurrence, or it might, maybe in some cases it may not, but for the most part, that's always a concern for us when cases don't move forward. But one of the things I did want to highlight that I think it's important for us to realize is that really domestic violence is still a major concern in this county. And I provided a stat to talk about our homicides over the past 3 years that we have had, and the numbers, what I did was just to highlight the numbers that are domestic related. And when I say it's domestic related, it's not always about an intimate relationship. It could be either intimate, a husband and wife, or boyfriend and girlfriend. It could be intimate related, where there was somebody else that was either there at the time of the incident that actually ended up getting murdered as a result of just being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or another family member. Or in the third category, I would state that I still consider it to be domestic related would be a parent or a grandparent that might be the victim or in this particular case. So when we really go back and look back at the numbers, for example, 2018 was the greatest number. We had 20 homicides for the entire year for the entire county. Out of those 20 homicides, 11 of them had some domestic component to them. We had 3 of those 11 were parent or a grandparent were the victim in that particular case. Intimate relationship directly was 3 cases, and then intimate related was actually 5. We had 2 incidents that was really of a concern. One that happened in Brookville, where it really started with the boyfriend and girlfriend. The girlfriend ran out of the house, ran to the neighbor. Unbeknownst to the neighbors was the fact that there were several people in the house at the time, as well as construction going on at the residence, that the suspect actually followed the girlfriend into the house and ended up killing 3 people, all who were not related at all to the suspect in that particular case. And then in another case we had where it was actually, again, a husband and wife going through a divorce, and then the husband unfortunately killed the wife as well as killing his 2 children. And he took his life at the end of that. But out of those 11 incidents, 9 of them involved guns. So in 2018, that shows again where the ERPO law does have a lot of weight in the state of Maryland based upon where we are now. And in 2017, just really quickly, again, we had 7 cases where of domestic-related incidents. 4 of those particular homicides were intimate, and 3 involved a parent. So again, those are just a brief overview of what that looks like for us. And again, the work continues to happen on a daily basis.
Thank you, Chief. Ms. Feinstein, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Councilmember Katz and Councilmember Hucker. Nice to see you. I want to sort of drill down on kind of the things that have been discussed and to speak to some of the questions that were outlined in the briefing packet that I think are relevant to some of the work that we're doing at the State's Attorney's Office. Sort of by way of setting up some background, as you may know, the way that our office works is we have the Special Victims Division, which I've been the chief of for the past 7 years. And our division prosecutes all of the cases related to domestic violence, sexual assault, elder abuse, human trafficking, and child abuse. So many of the co-victimization situations that Mr. Mannion was describing earlier, we actually house under sort of one roof in my office, and we're very thankful to be co-located at the Family Justice Center We have, I think at this point, 28 members of the state's attorney's office on site at the state's attorney's office, soon to be 30. We've also continued to grow in size, as has the police department. We are very happy to be sharing this space with the police department and with all of the members of the Family Justice Center and the Sheriff's Office, because it enhances our ability to successfully get to a just outcome when we're talking about violations in the criminal sense. We have the specific domestic violence dockets, which are housed in Silver Spring once a week and in Rockville once a week, which is somewhat of a national model with respect to having these specialized dockets with specialized prosecutors. Our entire division and my office in general follows a theory of vertical prosecution, which means one prosecutor, one case, one family essentially, so that we aren't constantly moving victims from prosecutor to prosecutor. We also follow an evidence-based model. So that means that our goal, and we work with the police department and have done training on this as well, our goal is to prosecute the case and reach a just outcome, in some cases, even where the victim, his or herself, does not want to proceed. Evidence-based prosecution is a methodology in which we literally use the evidence and use the rules of evidence and hearsay evidence in order to build a case, even if the victim does not want to participate, which in a significant number of our cases, they don't want to participate for a variety of reasons. One of the biggest ones being their own safety. It's not safe for them to participate. So that's what we follow. I also have the privilege of serving as the chair of the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Team, which many of our partners here at the table today and many others, including community members, are a part of that team. And what we do is we review deaths that are domestic violence, intimate partner related. We reconstituted several years ago, and we issued our first annual report, I think, ever in the history of the Fatality Review Team, thanks to one of the sheriffs and members of the sheriff's teams, Ngazi Abidame, who put together this wonderful report to report out on the 4 cases that we reviewed in 2017. And we are working on a report for 2018. We take a deep dive into each case in order to glean lessons. What can we learn? What can we do better? What gaps can we close? And as you may have seen, although I did provide this information a little belatedly, hopefully you'll have an opportunity to review the report. You'll see that we've already closed a number of the gaps that were identified. For example, something that was, there were some caution codes that were missing from some of the alerts that law enforcement was receiving, which we realized when reviewing a case. This was critically important for our men and women in uniform, and so we quickly moved to close that gap that was identified through the fatality review process. All of the cases that the chief mentioned will be, or either have been or will be reviewed. We actually cannot disclose, pursuant to the statute, which cases we're reviewing, and that's why the summary that you have from 2017 does not include names. I would note that I took a look at cases from July 2017 to July 2018, a little bit of a different breakdown than the chief did, but with similar results. During that time, there were 11, there were total of 8 victims that died during that time. And as was described by the chief, of those 8, 5 of them were intimate partner violence, 3 were related neighbors or strangers, and half were killed by gunfire, and the other half by blunt force trauma or asphyxiation. And this is similar to the statewide statistics that were put out. I included an excerpt from the statewide Fatality Review Team report that indicated that 67% of the intimate partner homicides or related homicides statewide from June 2017 to June 2018, I believe is when the breakdown was, or July, something like that. 67% of those were related to gunfire. And that relates to sort of the last point that I wanted to raise, which is we've had 1 violation of an ERPO come to prosecution since the enactment of the law. And I just wanted to share that example with you because it sort of touches on a lot of the things that we've been talking about today. This case came about in December of 2018 after the victim told, or the petitioner of the ERPO told the defendant that she wanted a divorce. He was actually out on a hunting trip at the time, and he told her that he was, first he said he wasn't going to come home, then he said he was going to bury her next to him, said that he told her, people know where the life insurance policy is, it's on the desk. He was distraught and suicidal. She went immediately and sought an ERPO, and the defendant was served. The sheriff's office removed many, many, many handguns and firearms from that home. They were primarily in one room, and he indicated there was another one on a desk in another location in their home. The defendant was then EAPed. There was an emergency evaluation petition because he was suicidal and because of his behavior. So he was taken to the hospital. Once he was at the hospital, the victim actually also sought an interim protective order. I think that was one of the other questions. What is the coexistence of protective orders and ERPOs? And she also sought an interim protective order because that stated that the defendant had threatened to kill her and himself. Again, high lethality factors, high correlation with death, unfortunately. The next day, he was released from the hospital, and he actually had a standby from the police department. He had a police escort to get his belongings, which is the way that it works for the ERPOs and for the protective orders. The defendant went into the home, went directly downstairs to a room that was locked. This was where the firearms had originally been located, I believe. His daughter unlocked the door for him. He immediately went and grabbed a black garbage bag and came out of the room, only then went upstairs to gather his personal belongings, which is what he was there for. He went to leave with the bag, and the police asked him what was in the bag, and he said it was medical supplies, but he wouldn't let them see what was in it. Ultimately, he agreed to leave the bag behind. He leaves in his car. The daughter quickly gestures to the police to come back inside, and sure enough, there is a gun in the bag with a silencer and I believe with 3 rounds of ammunition, all in the bag. He was charged with a violation of an extreme risk protective order. He went to trial. He contested it. He went to trial. He was found guilty. A prosecutor on my team, Kate Getty, prosecuted the case successfully, and ultimately he was found responsible for what he did. So that, as you can see, really enlisted the support of every partner that is at this table, had some hand in that case, and the existence of the ERPO statute made a huge difference for this family, saved lives. So thank you again for your time this afternoon.
Thank you. Captain, please.
So just go back, thank you very much for allowing me to speak to the victim-centered approach. So we're very proud over in Special Victims Investigations to conduct victim-centered investigations where the focus is on empowering the victim in cases of domestic violence, sex assault, because, and I mentioned that because the sex assault unit, part of my division, is co-located over at the Family Justice Center, along with our child abuse investigations that are housed separately over on Calhoun. But the detectives that are involved with those types of investigations, they focus on empowering the victims and talking about domestic violence today, giving the victims in those cases the opportunity to make personal decisions, while at the same time we work very closely with our partners to assure that as we're conducting a thorough investigation into the allegations, that they're being provided services through HHS and through our partners over at the Family Justice Center. With the trauma-informed interview approach that's also mentioned in that slide, it's taking into account the fact that victims that have suffered some substantial form of trauma, in this case domestic violence, which may be something that they've lived with for a number of years, victims of sex assault, that they may not react like everybody else. They may come across to the untrained person as maybe not providing truth. So we really focus our training and our efforts, in making sure that my detectives, the ones that are going to be handling those types of investigations, understand that not everybody's going to act maybe the way that they themselves might think, and it's one of those things that I think has allowed us to be very successful in working with our victims. And one of the things I want to just point out and highlight is that we've had a number of questions that have recently come in about exceptional clearances when it comes to these types of cases or sex assault investigations. And part of that victim-centered approach is the fact that, again, we're allowing for a victim, as we're working through and the case itself, that the victim still has the authority or the right to be able to tell us, at this point in time, I've changed, or circumstances have changed through the work with our victim advocates. That their lives have taken a different turn. They've decided at that point in time that they're they want to put this aside, and they don't want to participate in the investigation anymore. So we do have those types of circumstances that we work with. It's not a situation where, you know, we say that case goes away forever. It's one of those things that allows the victim to come back at a later time and say, hey, you know what? Things have changed again, and we want to go forward, and we're more than welcome to, you know, more than willing to open that case again.
Thank you. Do you have anything to?
Are you starting your?
Well, yeah, go ahead. Sure.
Thanks, Captain, that's really helpful. Are we doing questions for the
Yeah,
full panel,
sure.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah,
Okay, great.
absolutely.
Can I interrupt a minute, please? I'm sorry. Does Dr. Kroll, he also has a PowerPoint. I didn't know if you wanted to
Oh,
go
I
through
did
that
not.
first.
Did you want to?
If I could, just a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry to interrupt your quick analysis. But just to add on to this, because
Yeah, yeah.
there's a whole piece of this that is important from us, from HHS's perspective, around the Family Justice Center. They have been become a nexus of service for domestic violence victims that has really put our county's domestic violence effort on steroids. And so it's a good and welcome addition to that. The piece that I wanted to talk about was as a partner in Health and Human Services, our piece of this is the Abused Persons Program and our larger piece of victims of assault and sexual assaults program. Collectively, we think of them as our trauma services programs that deal with those two issues. That gives us some added support allows us to bring added support to the folks who come to the Family Justice Center, but also some other avenues for folks to access service and care. And it's one of the proud points for me in the county is that it's been around since 1976. So when the group came and the Family Justice Center launched, we were happy to be a part of that and happy to continue to see that process. I think there are a couple of things. One is that we do, the Family Justice Center, or the Abused Persons Program, does work with offenders as well as folks who are victims. So there's an Abused Persons Program and a track to try to help folks who have been offenders in this process to get the needs, to get the services they need. There is also the shelter pieces that folks have referred to, the Betty Ann Kroenke Center, which is focused on safety, on ensuring first the safety of folks, and then helping them to gain some equilibrium and then figure out what their next steps are to move forward, whether that's housing or court support or dealing with their parenting issues and trauma recovery for however long that takes. As part of that process of collaboration with the courts and with the justice system, we have a victims advocacy program that brings volunteers to the table from the moment that we get a notification from a hospital that someone has been assaulted or is a victim, or from the moment they show up at the crisis center or at the Family Justice Center. There's a linkage to a volunteer pool of folks who go out and spend time with them and will stay with them from front end to back door. And I think the other piece of this that's important is not just support for the victims, but support for female offenders as well in this process, because that does happen in our world. And the other one is support for children who witness domestic violence and who witness the sequelae of that. Police and law enforcement coming to pick someone up and arrest someone is an additional traumatizing experience that families need to work through. And I think the last piece is that with support and encouragement from Court Watch, the folks from Court Watch, we established a supervised visit and exchange system, the Safe Passages Center, that I'm very proud to say is up and running fully and is being utilized. My staff were telling me the other day that 1,349 families have come through and had supervised visitations or visits or exchanges as a way of promoting ongoing safety for folks who are victims of domestic violence, while at the same time allowing them to meet their obligations as parents. So it's a piece that is sort of some of the back door and some of the collaboration that extends into and beyond the Family Justice Center. So no matter where they come from, our goal is to try to figure out how we serve them and get them back into the full system of supports the Family Justice Center offers. So, thank you.
Thank you. Tom, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Ray. Sydney, I know you said we're going to come back to this, but I was also going to ask about if there is limited space at the FJC. While we're not going to solve it today, I know how long it takes to identify a Safe Passage Center location, or many other commercial leases tend to be long. Is the department looking into satellite locations, or what is the plan in a nutshell?
We have certainly grown considerably in the 10 years since we have been open. We were fortunate 4 or 5 years ago, I can't remember the exact time, Mr. Leggett, the county executive at the time, the business, a real estate business that was upstairs, kind of adjacent to where we were up there, unfortunately went out of business. But fortunate for us, we were able to absorb that 5,000 square feet of space. But as everything goes, it is getting very tight over there. There have been some internal meetings, having discussed maybe in the initial trying to move some folks around to see if we can establish some additional space of what's already there. But there's no doubt about what you're asking, that it is something that is expanding and the space is becoming limited. With that being said as well, when we initially went in there into the building, it was a 12-year lease, and that 12 years lease is up in 2022 or 2021. So we also have to start that process again of that whole discussion. So there's a lot, as you mentioned, there's a lot to do with this particular topic. Debbie and I are meeting on Friday to start a little bit more larger wide discussions on this, and because I know that nothing happens in a day. So this is going to be something that we're going to initially look to see if we can do some initial moving around of folks to try to settle what we need now, but in the long run, there is going to be some initial need, whether it's space in that building or some other building, I don't really know, but no doubt about it.
Well, and the problem with the satellite space, I mean, obviously, you have to do what you need to do, but the idea for the Family Justice Center was that a person could come to one place and have all of the services right there. And you start doing satellite services, then, I mean, it's not the same concept. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the model of co-locating is the whole functionality of not referring somebody to another location, which is where we were 12 years ago. Right. 10 or 11 years ago, basically, of having multiple locations for a domestic violence victim or a crime victim, frankly, to be able to go to out rather than receive services at one location. So ultimately, with in mind of having to continue to keep things co-located, we're working within that model and within that framework.
Good.
Thank you. Chief, you said all the DV cases originate with MCPD, Rockville, or Gaithersburg. Does Tacoma Park handle its own? They handle their own. Okay, I thought. And then on the case of reciprocity, you mentioned, your presentation mentioned that one RIPO case wasn't served because the defendant fled to the District of Columbia. Do they have any plans to pass such legislation, or?
I have not heard of such yet. We would hope that they would, but this does become a problem when you have individuals that are from adjoining states that may have family members here or may work here. That could create some issues for us as relates to this law specifically.
And is what happens if a defendant fled to Virginia?
Again, Virginia does not have a red flag law.
It doesn't.
So if the person is from Virginia,
Yep.
We would be sort of like where we were last year this time.
Right.
Because we didn't have this law in order. So you'd have to see if there's other investigative means in order to be able to try to ascertain the same result, but it's very difficult to get to that.
Yeah, would they even serve the defendant?
Probably, no. So the laws itself, even if we have an order and that individual lives in Virginia, there's nothing that really holds us, that gives us the authority to actually have that individual served in Virginia.
If I could, Councilmember Hucker, the DC's governing body is in the process of finalizing the red flag bill down there. So right. I don't have a date of when it goes into effect, but they are finalizing it. These civil orders, as Debbie mentioned, what happens when there's a violation and it becomes criminal. Up until that point, they are civil orders. So these orders don't have the full faith and credit necessarily of the domestic violence orders. So the service of them really doesn't really extend outside of Maryland. And we have seen a couple cases now of somebody making some workplace violence threats from outside of Montgomery County, but they had a Montgomery County resident address, and then we were able to, the ERPO was issued here, we were able to take the guns here, but the workplace violence threat was in another jurisdiction. What has been happening, but those have been few and far between, but they will occur just with any of our adjacent jurisdictions. What we have been seeing much more of, because we live in a region, we don't live necessarily in, everything is cross-county. The very first ERPO here in Montgomery County was a threat that occurred in Howard County. The ERPO was issued in Howard County. The person was located in Silver Spring in Montgomery County, but the guns and where he lived was in Anne Arundel County. So you had 3 law enforcement agencies working on this probably for 8 hours, an entire night, one night. And in fact, his guns were finally taken in by the Anne Arundel County Police Department. Montgomery County Police were working with the Howard County investigators, did locate him in Silver Spring, did serve the ERPO on him, and his firearms were taken. I don't know what happened in that final order, whether it went final because it was a Howard County case. I didn't kind of backfill into that one, although I've kind of become the clearinghouse in a lot of this. I don't know exactly what happened in those cases. But you are seeing an awful lot of cooperation between law enforcement in different jurisdictions. There's a number of these where somebody either lives in Prince George's, works in Montgomery, lives in PG, and we are often sending these orders back and forth between jurisdictions, and the jurisdiction where the person lives is usually the one that goes in, will get the firearms.
And in that case, I wanted to ask about firearms. Does the officer cross-check the deputy, cross-check the firearms that are surrendered with the list of the firearms that are registered to that individual?
Yeah, that is an automatic. So unfortunately in Maryland, the only guns that are actually registered in Maryland are regulated firearms. So that would be handguns, some long guns, AR-15s, those sort of guns that are specific in Maryland. So some of the rifles and shotguns that people may have, it is a tough find, but fortunately, as I mentioned earlier, in most of these cases, family are involved. And the family wants to make sure that their loved one is going to live tomorrow, live today, and they also want to make sure that their safety is paramount. So in almost all of these cases, there has been consent by the family members or consent from the respondents, the actual person in the ERPO. Clearly not in the case Debbie mentioned, but in most of these cases, consent have been given to get the firearms out to make everyone involved, the entire family, safer.
So you check what's surrendered against both the list that's registered and whatever
Absolutely.
petitioner or family member says the individual has.
Absolutely.
Possession. Great, thanks.
Thank you. And Susan, we're going to ask you if there's anything as a final, but I just want to thank each and every one of you on the panel, and there's people in the audience as well that I've been looking at as the panel has been speaking, that for all that you do. I know that we're all attempting to solve this from a variety of viewpoints. Mental health courts, keep coming back up, and of course that's another way that we can hopefully get somebody in a better situation and a family in a better situation without going through a horrible trauma and when I always call them the God forbids of life. So, but thank you all for doing this. So this is not easy work, but it certainly is necessary work. Susan, do you have anything as a final?
No, that's it. I'll get back to you with the questions that you had asked with the information.
Okay. Thank you all for being here. Thank you.